Hello, everyone. December 7th, we're starting here one more live stream, and this is going to be actually the last live stream of the year. As usual, we'll be addressing questions we have received offline, but feel free to chime in. Your topics of interest, they are going to have a priority over the offline questions. Okay, so even if you see a different subject being discussed, don't be shy and just type your topic of interest, and we're gonna be addressing here live for you. Okay, let me see if we have any questions already. No questions so far, so we're gonna start with an offline question. How important is family in Brazil, in Brazilian culture? And by the way, today the questions we have compiled over here, they are about cross-border relationships. Not surprisingly, we have a number of clients who are married or they have partners who are Brazilians. And because of this connection, this personal connection, usually this is going to develop into additional connections to the country, such as the possibility of living for some time in Brazil, purchasing real estate properties in Brazil, and other potential relationships. So the question again, it's how important is family in Brazilian culture? And I can say that in theory, the family has a really high quality. When you compare like Brazil and the United States, for instance, it's usually more common for Brazilians to have a family as a high priority. Okay, so in the U.S., you're gonna see that sometimes siblings they don't talk to each other, or you have like what is called like like a broken relationship between a and a child. Of course, this is not a rule. That's also happening in some cases in Brazil, but it is much more rare, right? So I think this is an interesting distinction worth mentioning when it comes to family. Now, like there is no single rule. Like you're gonna see that some individuals, particularly when they immigrate to the United States, for instance, or when they immigrate to another country in Europe, sometimes the initial reason behind such a change of countries is exactly the desire to live in a different culture, maybe because you have like different values from what most of the Brazilian population would have, right? So from this perspective, although yes, family has a really high degree of importance for Brazilians in general, it's not uncommon to see people, Brazilians who were born in Brazil but are currently living in the US to have a very different behavior from what you would expect from a Brazilian, if that makes sense, right? I mean, there is no single type of behavior, and I think it's easy for you to understand that there is a great variety of behavior and population. Another question here: what are common dating customs in Brazil? All right, so this person is asking about dating, like how Brazilians interact with foreign citizens, and it's an interesting question because what we see most of the time happening between a Brazilian and a foreign citizen in terms of the beginning of the relationship, it's usually very different from what we see between two Brazilians. Some distinctions are like, particularly in the US, men are much faster in terms of, trying to make the his dating partner happy truth financial power, right? I mean, just being very straightforward. So it's not rare. Like we see sometimes there is a gentleman in the U.S. and then there is a lady in Brazil, and this gentleman, like in just a few months after meeting this lady, he's going to start to pay something for this lady. I don't know. Like the lady is going to say, well, like here in Brazil, it's always a struggle to pay rent, to make ends meet. And all of a sudden, this person, this gentleman from the US is going to say, oh, you know what? Like I have a plenty of resources here. I don't mind sending you like $1,000 a month to help you with your expenses, right? And from the U.S. Person or the U.S. man's perspective, he doesn't see anything wrong with it, it's difficult for us to say how a relationship should start or how it should work. Of course, there is no single recipe for a relationship. But what I can tell you is that this is absolutely inexistent, like that doesn't exist in Brazil between two Brazilians, right? So, like a Brazilian man would never offer to pay the woman's living expenses unless they were in some type of serious relationship, right? Like after like marrying or maybe a common law marriage, right? Like they start to live together, and that's only at that point that a Brazilian man would offer to pay anything for the Brazilian woman, right? And again, we see something very different when there is like a foreign citizen. And that's not just like with men from the United States. It's super common with men from Europe. Of course, like Europe has also, a very different standard when it comes to income or purchasing power. So it's super common for Europeans to come to Brazil, like if he's a man, if they meet a Brazilian woman, all of a sudden they start to offer, right, like things that have a financial value in a very short period of time. And this is not common in the Brazilian culture. I don't know how to interpret that fact, right? And it's just like a different type of relationship. If the Brazilian woman, like she's struggling financially, and if she decides to accept this financial help from the foreign citizen, it doesn't mean that she's necessarily taking advantage. However, I can tell you that she would never expect a Brazilian same, right? So it looks like when a Brazilian woman is like dating with a foreign citizen, different rules are going to apply, expectations, right? And again, like it's very different and it's very unusual, even when we see such a thing happening. It does look like a little bit off, okay? But again, who am I to tell how a relationship should be? But that's an answer, right? Like going back again, what are common dating customs in Brazil? So among the Brazilians, there is no like financial exchange until really later on in the relationship, right? Like there is no such a thing as a Brazilian guy offering to a Brazilian woman to help with her expenses. Another type of common situation, and I'm not talking about any client in particular, because we probably saw that happening so many times, so it's not about a single client. It's also common, like there is a gentleman in his 50s or his 60s. He comes to Brazil, he meets a woman like in her 30s with children from a prior relationship, and at this moment in time, the woman is going to be as a single mother, and it looks like it's almost like a magnet, right? Like it looks like this foreign citizen is going to see that as an opportunity to say, all right, like I have something to offer, right? Like maybe I'm in my 50s, 60s. I'm not that young anymore, right? Like, I mean, I don't have the same looks I had 20, 30 years ago, but I do have a lot of money, okay? And I'm going to try to make up for whatever I am not able to offer in terms of looks or, again, not necessarily criticism. I'm just like bringing information for you guys, to understand the dynamics in terms of dating customs in Brazil. Okay, let's move to the next offline question. If you are here in our live stream, remember that if you are participating, and I can see that we have viewers right now, if you have a topic of interest, that's going to take priority over the offline questions, okay? So feel free to jump in, even if your question has nothing to do with personal relationships we're going to be addressing here in our live stream. Let's move to the next one. How do Brazilians typically express affection? Okay, foreigners are curious about the ways Brazilians show affection, both in romantic relationships and friendships. I think it's not a secret that Brazilians have a much, like closer body presence, right? Like in the U.S., in the European countries, usually there is this kind of rule, like you're not gonna get too close to another person. Like in the US, it's super common for people to greet each other without even extending a handshake, right? Like, I mean, I saw that happening 1,000 times, right? You meet someone, you just say, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. It's also common to extend like a handshake, but it's also super common to not have a handshake at all. And in Brazil, that would be probably absolute must. I mean, the least see it's going to be a handshake between two guys, but like between a man and a woman, like even in a business environment, it's super common for them to greet each other with like pretending kisses on the cheek, right? Like I say pretending because they're not usually actually kissing each other. They're just touching their cheeks and making the kiss sound like right, and that's a very common in Brazil. Okay, now particularly for people who travel abroad, like if you go to a large company in Brazil where like the upper management personnel are people who travel often abroad, they are going to, interestingly, they are going to replicate what they see abroad. So if you see like a meeting, a big company in Brazil like Microsoft or KPMG, any big name you think about in Brazil, they are not going to be like greeting each other with, like the cheek to cheek pretending kiss. They are going to be doing handshakes, between a man and a woman or between two men. It's always going to be a handshake. Okay, so yes, Brazilians are much closer. They are usually faster to express, love. They like, to be in personal contact with a romantic partner. And you should expect, even in a relationship between a foreign citizen and a Brazilian, you should expect to see the same type of behavior, okay? If you don't see it, I would say that's a kind of red flag, okay? All right, we have a couple of questions here in our chat. I hope I'm not gonna mess up too much. GM, GMS Hawaii, okay? So GMS Hawaii is asking, or he's basically saying, I believe American relationships are so transactional that we bring that with us, not realizing Brazil has its own culture. That's a great participation, Hawaii. That's so true. Like, I mean, I see, honestly, like when I see our clients doing so, I can see that they have their best intentions in their hearts, okay, and they just don't realize this is not part of the Brazilian culture, right? Brazilian culture, there is no such a thing as start you paying someone else's expenses. I would say, like from a Brazilian man's perspective, it looks weird, right? Maybe looks like you need to make up for something you cannot provide as a person. So you end up looking different, I would say. But that's a great point. I mean, in the U.S., this is so common. So I would guess our clients from the U.S. they don't even realize they're doing something that's really off and solved from the Brazilian culture perspective. Okay, now there is a question from GMS Hawaii. How do you discern if a woman is genuinely attracted to you versus attracted to you financially? Well, I was addressing, affection. So Brazilians, they are really, show affection through, touching and kissing and hugging and particularly at the early stages of a relationship through sex, right? I mean, there is no denial, right? It's part of our existence, and there is no reason to deny. Okay, but so if you are an American and you have a Brazilian partner, and this Brazilian partner it's not showing this type of affection, if she's like not touching, she's not touching you with a certain frequency, if she's refusing a more intimate contact, that could be a sign that things are not what you expect. And even if the person does show such traits, right? If she's all over you, right? And there is still a chance that the financial component is going to be there. Something that unfortunately is very common here at the firm is for U.S. citizens to come to us and say, "Listen, I had a relationship with a Brazilian, and after this person secured the green card, guess what? Like, I mean, this person doesn't want to be with me anymore." So I think U.S. citizens should have in mind, and I don't think U.S. citizens are naive in that point that there is a lot of appeal for being a U.S. citizen because that would open a door for a Brazilian to migrate to the United States, right? And I don't need to say how attractive the United States is from a migration perspective, right? You just need to look at the border or swarming the border to try to get into the U.S. illegally. It doesn't matter, right? There are lots of Brazilians over there. And now, if you think about a U.S. citizen, like I mean, a U.S. citizen is a means for a Brazilian to migrate to the U.S. and with everything legal, right? So, if a person, for instance, is going to secure U.S. residency through work or business, it's not rare for these applicants to take a decade or even like 15 years or sometimes 20 years to get to a point when they are going to be permanent residents or U.S. citizens, right? So think about the marriage track. The marriage track, like you could be in the U.S. in a couple of years or in a year and a half. So it's it does stand out the fact that whenever a Brazilian is in touch or is in a connection or in a relationship with a Brazilian, with a U.S. citizen, it's very hard to imagine that the fact that this person is a U.S. citizen doesn't have any weight, right? So yes, I mean you need to be cautious. Like, and if I would answer how I your question a different way, what you do to avoid such types of relationships when a woman is attracted to you financially. I would say don't offer money right off the bat, right? Like, I mean, this is not normal by Brazilian standards. Brazilian men, they do not offer money to to a Brazilian woman, right? Unless, and actually, he's not never gonna offer. Like, he would probably, if the relationship is serious, they are gonna start to live together, or they are gonna marry, and only then the man is gonna start to take care of the household expenses, but he's never gonna send money or give money to the Brazilian woman. So when a U.S. citizen does that, I mean, it is off the Brazilian customs, and it does stand out, okay, and not necessarily in a good way. I think the message that women could be getting, unfortunately, is that there's a lot of money, and if they get in a relationship with this person, they are gonna have easy access to money. I mean, it doesn't sound like a good message to me. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, Hawaii is sharing here. I was taken advantage of by a woman in Brazil for my financial ability. I love Brazil, its people and culture. I came to Brazil in 2020, and it happened to me. I'm really sorry, Hawaii. I mean, just trying to get, like another perspective. We also have, really solid relationships between U.S. citizens and Brazilians. Some couples we meet here at the firm, they've been together for 20 years. They've been together for 30 years. They have children. They have properties. They have a real history in common. Okay, maybe we should interview one of these couples. That's actually an idea. I'm gonna take note here so I don't forget. Interview a couple slash Brazil couple to see if we can find out the reasons for their successful and lasting relationship. Okay. We have Almond D. Jones. My great grandmother was born in Bahia, Brazil, but her children and grandchildren, my grandmother and my dad, were born in the U.S. Would I, a third generation, be eligible for a Brazilian passport? Okay. Yes, Almond. Most probably yes. There is a need for this, nationality to be recognized by your dad first, okay? Because, like, although in theory you are eligible, you need to follow strict requirements from the Brazilian government. So the first step would be for your dad to be to receive like the recognition of a Brazilian nationality, and as soon as he does so, you would be eligible for the Brazilian passport, but not before, not because you don't qualify, but because this is going to be a requirement, right? Like they want to have like this nationality dripping correctly between your grandparents and your parents, and then it's your turn. But unless your father, which I understand was born in the U.S., unless he does apply for the Brazilian nationality, you're not going to have the documents that you're going to need to provide from a procedural perspective. Okay, in theory, you could maybe try to apply through a legal procedure, but I would not recommend, because like whenever you need a remedy from a court of law in Brazil, you are opening yourself to potentially, years and years and years of funding the suit. And this could cost, I don't know, 10 times what it would cost for you to first secure the nationality for your father and then the nationality for you. That was helpful. We have a D Hustler 15. Bom dia. Welcome, D Hustler, to our live stream. Let us know if you have any topics of interest to be discussed here in our live stream. Okay, we have a GMS Hawaii. When you purchase property as a foreign citizen, does that help the visa process in Brazil? And do I get to keep my U.S. Citizenship? Yes, real estate acquisition in Brazil, it's one of the, I would say, best and easiest ways to get residency in Brazil. You just gotta do it like carefully because there are requirements for the property. There is a minimum required price, which is very easy for everyone to understand. Nowadays, it's 1 million reais in most of the country. This amount is going to be 700,000, so 30% less in the north and the northeast of the country. It gotta be a urban property. Okay, so if you're thinking, for instance, to buy land in the Amazon, it's not going to qualify. If you're thinking about buying land in the countryside of Rio de Janeiro, this is not going to qualify. It got to be urban property. It got to be either built or a pre-construction property coming from a major development. Okay, you cannot just buy land and build yourself. That does not qualify. You need to send the money in a very specific way. Okay, you can just send the money, open a bank account, send the money to your bank account, and then buy the property. There is a very specific way of sending the money. And there is also a need for reasonably clean criminal records. Okay, I hope that was helpful. There is another piece of the question. I was wondering, how long does it take to purchase property as a foreigner? In our experience, like once you find the target property, once you say, listen, this is the one, usually it's going to take between 60 and 90 days, okay? Sometimes, realtors are going to say, well, we can get it done in 15 days. But unless this is your second acquisition and you have like the paperwork ready, 15 days is not going to be enough. And there is also the matter of sending the money the right way. So we're going to need to use a currency exchange bank. All of that is going to create some complexities that, from a time perspective, end up resulting in a timeline of 60 to 90 days after you find the target property, okay? Not 15 days. In Rio de Janeiro nowadays, it's super common if you get to a real estate agency, they will say, no, you can close in 15 days, right? They usually say that because they are going to skip on the due diligence, right? They're going to do just something more pro forma, just present like clearance certificates, but they're not going to do a more serious due diligence. That's the first reason. And the second reason, when someone tells a foreign citizen that they can do it in 15 days, is probably because they never did it before. Because when they do it, they understand that because of all the steps, all the requirements, just like the apostilled birth certificate, and then you need to have it like sworn translated. You need to record in a particular registry, to exchange, like you need to present a lot of paperwork to the bank. You need to organize the closing date, and you need to have the bank on the same page, so the money is going to be released only on the same day of closing. So all of those things, they take time, right? Like they don't happen overnight. Nobody's going to be just waiting for your transaction to get everything done in a week. The professionals, they have other transactions going on as they speak. So all in all, 30 to 60 days, sometimes even 90 days, all right? So hopefully that answers the question how all right, there is another question. D Hustler 15. I just got my CPF and I am an American citizen. Will that change? Will that change the upcoming visa application process going forward? Yeah, I mean the CPF it's an important ID, right? It's your tax identification in Brazil, so that would be one of the requirements for you to buy real estate, and that's also, in our experience, that helps with applications for benefits in Brazil. So, for instance, if you are applying for the digital nomad visa, which can get you up to 2 years of stay in Brazil, and you're applying in Brazil, you're gonna need the CPF because the CPF is gonna be the ID that the Brazilian immigration is gonna use to have your payments of the applicable fees, and most importantly, you're gonna use your CPF to schedule your final interview at the immigration. So, for instance, when you hire our firm to apply for the Brazil Digital Nomad Visa, if you don't have a CPF, we're gonna apply for a CPF on your behalf. So, if you have a CPF, you are a step ahead, okay? But the CPF is not gonna mean that you're gonna have a priority or anything additional to someone who doesn't have a CPF. Okay, D. Hustler, I hope this helps your question. Let's see if there is any other question here from the chat. All right, let's go back to the offline list. What is the Brazilian approach to friendship? Okay, yeah. So Brazilians, they are very friendly. In general, like they love foreign citizens because foreign citizens they're different, right? They speak a different language. They have different costumes. So from this perspective, it's almost like a novelty, right? A U.S. citizen, for instance, if he's visiting any city in Brazil, it could be Rio. Rio, not so much because of the huge number of foreign citizens, but even like São Paulo, which has a large number of foreign citizens. Like if you go out, to a dance club or to a bar, and people realize you are foreign citizen, like all of a sudden you're going to be more interesting than the next bear, right? I hope that makes sense. So you're going to see that people are going to be really friendly. They are going to be talkative. They are going to be sometimes, touching you, like they're going to put the palm of their hands on your back. They're going to be interested in your history, in knowing why you are in Brazil. And so people in Brazil, they are, I would say, much more friendly than people are in Europe or in the US. Of course, there are exceptions, and there is no single rule, right? But in general, Brazilians, they are more friendly. They are more optimistic about the future. They don't do as much planning as usually it is done in the US, in the UK, in most of Europe, right? And that's just a reality, right? Like people, I would say people enjoy more life in Brazil. Of course, there are upsides and downsides. The upside is the upside by itself. People really enjoy life. They're super happy even when they don't have much in financial terms. They're still gonna be happy. They are gonna, meet neighbors and family members, over the weekend for barbecue. You don't need to wait for a special date. Like every weekend is gonna be a special date. On the other side, you're gonna see that people, end up messing up with their financials because, happiness is such an important value for Brazilian society. So, because of that, people are gonna be very often cutting corners. That's very unfortunate. Okay, so that's probably why you see so much, fraud in Brazil, right? Maybe I should not be saying that, but I'm being very candid here with you. So there is a lot of fraud in Brazil, like I would say, and there is fraud everywhere, right? Like there is a lot of fraud in the US, in Europe, but in Brazil, I would expect to see a higher degree of fraud across the board, just because I mean people are gonna be valuing, like happiness, relationships. So, for instance, the perspective of what I'm trying to say, maybe I'm not saying correctly. I'm not saying that Brazilians are cheaters. I'm just saying that there is probably a percentage of fraud. I'm not saying that everyone is pulling fraud in Brazil, but like in Brazil, if you have a friend and a friend does something wrong, Brazilians are almost always to try to find a reason for why this friend did something wrong, right? Like they are not going to see this thing objectively, like this person committed a crime, right? Like this person has done something bad, right? Usually Brazilians are going to be like, well, it was someone else's fault, or all right, I understand, like he was doing that for their children, right? And that's something that handicaps Brazil, you know, holds Brazil down from achieving higher heights, I would say, right? But that's just part of the reality, just to make sure this doesn't come across wrong. There are, like hardworking in Brazil is pretty common, all right? So much people, they are going to be hard workers. They are also going to value family. They are going to, really try to take care of their, family members. They are going to care about friends. So, of course, there are so many upsides, okay? In addition to some downsides to the type of culture we have in Brazil. All right. Are there specific cultural taboos or sensitive topics in Brazilian relationships? Well, I think there was in the past, like Brazil, or a conservative country. But nowadays is been changing probably because in a certain way Brazil kind of follows, like the new movements or the social development in the U.S. Although some Brazilians they kind of hate the U.S. I would say President Lula, for instance. I mean, I don't think he makes any effort, to hide how antagonist he is in terms of the United States. But the truth is, like all Brazilians, they actually, realize the United States, and because of all the social changes that occurred in the United States during the last 20 years, I would say Brazil has basically emulate every single social change that you can think of, right? So just like the United States, nowadays, same-sex relationships are absolutely normal. Okay, people are gonna be walking freely the streets, like same-sex couples holding hands. 99% of the time, nobody's gonna be bothering them, right? So that's just an example. Common law marriage, which initiated in other countries now, it's something pretty, stable and solidified in the Brazilian culture. So nowadays, I would say that Brazilians are not that conservative anymore. They are pretty open. Other things, so there are no taboos, right? Or sensitive topics. There is the usual, just again, just like in the US, there is this kind of polarization between right and left. And just like the United States has, President Donald Trump, like in Brazil, we have President Jair Bolsonaro. They are almost the same, like from a character's perspective, and Brazil is in the same type of frequency. So interesting because President Donald Trump had a single term at the office. President Jair Bolsonaro had a single term, in the office. And now it looks like President Donald Trump has a really good shot at coming back. And if it wasn't for the Brazilian, Supreme Court, I would say it would be the same thing for President Jair Bolsonaro, right? Because people were really pushed away for some of the President Jair Bolsonaro's declarations about COVID, downplaying COVID, or making jokes about like the LGBT community. But now that the left has came back to the power, like people are starting to say, well, like President Jair Bolsonaro, he was doing some pretty solid changes to the bureaucracy, trying to modernize. So, just like everything else, there are pros and cons for, like these models, but the polarization that you see in the US, it's impressive that we see the exact same thing happening in Brazil, and the timing, right? The timing of these presidents, going away after a single term and, like on track to come back again. It's so similar when you compare like the US to Brazil in this perspective, right? So lots of different things, but at the end of the day, like Brazil does kind of try to emulate what they see in the United States, okay? All right, we have Almond D. Jones. I visit Brazil maybe 5 times per year. That's a lot, Almond. I do have a 10-year visa already. Would it make sense for me to have a CPF because I visit so much and have a distant family connect? Or don't worry about. Listen, Almond, if you are, being able to enjoy your time in Brazil without a CPF, I would rather stay without it, okay? Because a CPF, although it does not trigger tax residency, of course, a CPF is just like a tax ID, but it does create the presumption of taxation, right? Like, I mean, you have a tax ID that in theory the government could plug you into the tax system, right? So if you want, like if you are enjoying your time, if you're not finding, too much troublesome to not have a cell phone plan when you are in Brazil because you need a CPF for the purpose. Sometimes if you want to buy flight tickets in Brazil, you're going to need a CPF, right? Like, so the CPF is needed for pretty much everything that you're going to do in Brazil as a Brazilian. But if you are able to get away without a CPF tax ID, I think you should stay like that, all right? Taxation is a huge downside of a residency in Brazil, okay? Brazil, for tax residents, Brazil is going to tax your global income. So that means every single piece of income you have in the US, you're going to need to disclose it to Brazil. And not only to disclose, but you're going to need to pay taxes on it. There is a credit approach in which Brazil tries to compensate, like whatever you're paying in taxes in the US, they would kind of try to apply against your tax liabilities in Brazil. But that's not across the board, right? Like they segregate in silos. So there is a silo for your, if you have employment income, there is going to be a second silo for financial income from stocks. There is going to be a third silo for income from rental, right? And once you get a CPF, again, it doesn't mean you're going to become a tax resident, but I would say you are a step closer because now the Brazilian government knows how to track you, okay? Now, because you mentioned like 5 times per year, just a heads up from a taxation perspective, if you stay in Brazil for more than 183 days in a 12-month period, you're going to be considered as a tax resident, right? And it doesn't matter if you want to be or not, right? Some people tell me, well, but I'm just coming as a tourist in Brazil. It's not my intention to stay here. So your intention has zero bearing, right? It doesn't matter. You could come to Brazil, for instance. People come to Brazil to study for a single year. People come to Brazil to visit, and they need to stay in the country because of some healthy issue. There is zero bearing the reason why you are in Brazil. If you cross the 183-day threshold in any 12-month period, and it's a moving 12-month period, okay? So, meaning we're not talking January to December, we're not talking July to June. We're talking about any 12-month period. So the idea is that the government wants for people who are staying for over 183 days, even if in separate trips, they want this person because they have such a strong presence in the country to be paying taxes. Okay, that's the intention of the Brazil, and that's something for you to consider. All right, Almondi. All right, Almondi just provided interesting information. I am an airline employee. I come and go freely. I usually don't stay for more than a week or two at a time. I stay with family. Perfect. So that's great. Like you don't run into any risks of becoming a tax resident because you're crossing the 183 days. So, from this perspective, you are a non resident from a tax perspective, right? Just because we mentioned in this topic, like if you have a property in Brazil, you still need to pay tax in Brazil because you have a property in Brazil. Or if you are even as an airline employee and you get some income in Brazil, you're not going to need to disclose your global income, but whatever income you're getting from Brazil, this is going to be taxable in Brazil. Okay, making sure that's clear. All right, let's see if we have more questions. How open are Brazilians to cross-cultural relationships? Well, I would say, we addressed that early in our live stream. Brazilians are pretty open, okay, to cross-cultural relationships. It doesn't matter where. It could be São Paulo, it could be Rio de Janeiro, Florianópolis, Belo Horizonte, Ceará, northeast of the country, the Amazon, everywhere, right? Like, I mean, if a Brazilian sees another Brazilian, like in a romantic relationship to a foreign citizen, they're not going to have any issues with that, right? Nobody's going to feel offended or nobody's going to feel like this relationship should not exist. Actually, usually, again, Brazilians are very curious about foreign citizens. So if there is a Brazilian in a romantic relationship with a foreign citizen, the Brazilian friends are going to be, all over the Brazilian asking, how is the relationship? How is this other person? What they have, planned for the future, if they really like the foreign citizen, and so on. So I would say Brazilians are pretty open to cross-cultural relationship, and usually it's going to be a matter of interest to other Brazilians, and Brazilians in general don't feel any like thing bad, like oh they are they should be with a Brazilian and not a foreign citizen. I never saw that happening before. There are many other concerns. I mean, just like we discussed it over here, particularly when the foreign citizen starts to offer money, right? Like, let me help you pay your rent because I know how difficult it is to make money in Brazil. It does sound weird, okay? It does sound weird, and I think like if particular U.S. citizens could, try to delay this type of offer, like wait until you are in a serious relationship to really step in and help financially if that's what you want to do. I think it would be really good for relationship, okay? Because offering money right at the beginning, it just sounds in the Brazilian's perspective, okay? And if the person ends up accepting, maybe because the person really needs some type of financial help, this person could feel like guilty because she's taking someone else's money. Uh, Again, it doesn't make much sense from the Brazilian's perspective. So that could be a recommendation for U.S. citizens. Like, I mean, if you can take the other person to a date, like, and you can spurge this person, take to a nice restaurant, and whenever you are together, you are allowing this person to have a good time. I think that's pretty good enough for the beginning of a relationship, right? Don't start to offer money to help the person pay the person's rent, because it doesn't make much sense, again, from a Brazilian's perspective. I hope it makes sense. All right, the hustler, obrigado, pretty welcome. Have Moses Mibagwu. If I make a fixed deposit of 200,000 US dollars in a Brazilian bank for more than 4 years, will that qualify me for investment visa? No, Moses. The investment visas, they are going to be either, right? Like there's not a bunch of tracks for investment visa. Whenever we are talking about investment visa, there are two tracks only, okay? And they're pretty new, by the way. They started basically in President Bolsonaro's administration. So we're talking about 2018, right? So before 2018, there was no investment visa. And but since 2018, there is the real estate investment visa, which in our opinion is the best track because you don't have complications, you don't have strings attached. And if you follow the rules, and there are many rules for the real estate investment visa, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to get, right? The other track is going to be for you to invest in a company. However, the investment in a company kind of thing is going to require you to keep like employment positions. And I never get tired of sharing this concern. In Brazil, unfortunately, taxation is all over the place. Like in the US, if you have a small company, you can pay a CPA once a year and you're good. In Brazil, you're going to need to pay an accountant every single month, because every single month there's going to be some type of obligation for this company to file with the government. And the red tape and bureaucracy is just I think unacceptable from particularly a foreign citizen coming from a developed country such as the US. In the US, you can open a company literally in a couple of hours. You pay a rush fee. In the morning, in the afternoon, you have a company, right? Like in Brazil, if you're opening an entity as a foreign citizen, that could easily take 3 months, right? When there is a foreign a business partner, a foreign company partner, that could take 6 months. So there is such a difference in terms of running a business in the US and in Brazil. I would say most of the time, I don't think that investing in a company is going to be a good idea for a foreign citizen, right? On top of what I just said, there are bogus lawsuits. This is a tradition in Brazil, bogus labor lawsuits, okay? There is something that's horrifying, in my opinion, okay? Many Brazilians, they think it's just part of life. When you are, for instance, in São Paulo downtown or Rio de Janeiro downtown, and you leave the subway station, it's pretty common for you to see a person holding a sign, right? Labor attorney, come see us, okay? So first thing, like they are not authorized to do this type of, demeaning type of advertisement, but they do anyhow. And when this person goes to the labor attorney is going to be trying to find a way to frame a lawsuit against the employer, right? So it doesn't matter if there are legal bases or not. The labor attorney is going to try really hard to find something that would qualify as some type of doubt that could be taken to the court. And usually, because of the company wants to run its business, it doesn't want to get entangled in a lawsuit. Even if it is a bogus lawsuit, the company may end up paying something, to make this thing just go away, right? So imagine you go to Brazil, you invest in a company, 6 months down the road, you are hit with a bogus lawsuit, right? I think nobody deserves that. So that's why we try really hard to avoid this track when people really say, listen, I am aware of the challenges. I don't care if I get hurt like down the line. We say, yeah, well, if you are aware and you still want to proceed, then we kind of help the person, like achieve residency through investment in a company. But 9 times out of 10, we're going to recommend for the person to do the real estate track instead. Okay. All right. Moses has a follow-up question. All right. If I invest 200,000, will I be given indefinite visa or temporary? Right. That's pretty interesting. The choice of words from Moses, because in the past we would say permanent visa, like in the U.S. Right. But nowadays the Brazilian immigration is using the indefinite. And it's just like, a silly distinction because Brazil doesn't want to say a permanent because then it makes more difficult to remove this visa if needed. So Brazil is going to have this weird choice of words, indefinite visa, right? And that's exactly the word that Moses is using in his question. And the way it works is like this, Moses. The law says that for as long as you keep the immigration benefit, you're gonna need to keep the investment. All right. So in theory, like if you look from a law perspective, you're buying an apartment for $200,000, $200,000 US. You should keep this property virtually forever, right? Now, in reality, what we see happening is like many applicants, like they are gonna apply. Once you buy the property, you did everything by the books. Everything is done correctly. You can apply. Usually, 60 days down the road, they are gonna approve your visa. You're gonna need to attend an interview in a Brazilian consulate, of course, outside of Brazil. And then they are going to give you the visa abroad, and then you're going to need to come back to Brazil to attend a second interview with the federal police. That's when you're going to get your RNM number, which is like the foreign citizens registration, which you're going to get, what I like to joke as the Brazilian green card, okay? And this first green card is going to be good usually for 4 years. So that's for sure not the indefinite. That's the temporary one, right? So you bought the property, let's say 6 months down the road, you get the first residency for 4 years. After the 4 years expire, you're gonna apply for a renewal. And most probably than not, you're gonna get the indefinite visa. So that's gonna be 4 years down the road. The indefinite visa means, from the government perspective, that you're gonna have this benefit for as long as you want or you live, right? So what we see happening is after they secure the indefinite visa, many applicants they are gonna sell the property, right? If they need to do so. However, the interpretation of the law is that you should keep the property virtually forever. So let's say if for some reason you lose your indefinite visa card and you need to apply for a new one, guess what? The immigration could ask, all right, give me updated records for the property so I can see. And if you are unable to prove that you're still owning the property, in theory, the Brazilian immigration could deny the issuance of a replacement card, okay? Most probably than not, immigration is not following that strictly, particularly after you get an indefinite visa. They may not look at the underlying records. And as long as you are, without any, criminal matters showing up, they most probably than not would give replacement card. But again, we cannot guarantee that that's what's going to happen because the law It's pretty clear you should keep the property for as long as you want to have the immigration benefit. Now, all right, Moses has a question. I have read many articles that said I will be getting indefinite residency immediately instead of temporary if I can invest as much as 200,000. They are wrong, okay? We apply for, residency here at the firm. Not sure if every single week, but, every single month for sure. And we pay attention to the green cards they get. It's going to be either 2 years or 4 years, okay? 80% of the time, 20% of the time, they are going to get the indefinite, but most probably because of a mistake by the immigration officer. And that's pretty interesting. Immigration in Brazil in general, they are not super consistent. So this is something I think I shared in a prior live stream. We had a couple, they bought an apartment in Rio de Janeiro for 3 million reais. They applied with us, right? 2 separate applications for the residency through real estate. One of them, they got 2 years, right? While the second one got 4 years. And they were pretty, they were kind of happy because they got the residency, but at the same time, I think it was a couple. The wife got the 2 years, the husband got the 4 years. There was no reason whatsoever. They said, can we appeal? We said, yes, you can appeal, but we're going to basically charge you for a new application because of the work required. And then at the end of the day, they decided, you know what, like I'm just going to wait for, once we are 1.5 years down the road or, 90 days before the expiration of the 2 years, we're basically going to apply for an additional 2 years and they're going to be entitled to, right? But this thing of getting the indefinite visa, it's wrong, okay? That does not exist. And there is a bunch of inconsistent information out there. Like sometimes I take a look at the expat forums and it is surprising, right? Like, I mean, usually you're going to see things that do not have any support in the law or how the Brazilian immigration decides cases, but that's why we are here, right? Like there are people who are going to try on their own. They have enough time. They have patience. Like if they need to try multiple times, and that's fine. And there are others who are going to secure an attorney to make it done right the first time, right? But I understand. How much will you charge me aside from the capital investment, process this investment visa? Yes, we do offer, that's a good question, Moses. We do offer just like the processing for the investment visa. Okay, we usually ask to see the documents to see, if you have everything correctly, right? Because some cases we're not going to even take. For instance, if you invest in a real estate property and you sent the money the wrong way, we know there is a high chance this thing is not going to be accepted by the Brazilian immigration. We're not going to even take your case, right? Sometimes there are issues, but there are issues that we can fix. And in this case, we're not going to charge you just to process the investment visa, but we're going to need to charge you additional to fix whatever it was done incorrectly, if that's feasible, right? Some things can be fixed, other things cannot. So we don't give you a price right off the bat. This process, Moses, is very important for you to understand. This is not like, some people, they send an email, send me a requirement list, right? Send me the price list, send me the requirements, tell me the exact documents, right? That's not how we work. And that's probably why people are happy with our services. Our services are customized to the client's reality and the specifics. And we cannot just have a price list because in some cases, like we're going to need to work double of what we're going to work otherwise. So we factor in the specifics of a client in our pricing, okay? I hope that makes sense, Moses. Okay, there is another question. If I enter into a relationship with a Brazilian, how can I protect my assets? Are my assets to be distributed in case of a marriage, only the assets in Brazil, or would a divorce affect my assets in the US as well? All right. So here is how it works, right? You could be married, but you could also be in a common law marriage. So it doesn't mean you need to be married for a partner to be some rights, but the rights, they are going to be usually to the assets that were obtained through the marriage, right? So if you have assets prior to the marriage or prior to the common law marriage, these assets, in theory, they are not going to be the object of a distribution in a divorce case in the future, okay? Now, one concern that I usually address when we have a consultation with a client, and this client is like inquiring about, common law marriage, or they're going to get really married in Brazil, I usually recommend a prenuptial agreement, specifically to say that, income coming from assets prior to marriage in Brazil, this income is going to be considered common property, right? So let's say you have 10 pieces of real estate in Europe and you marry someone in Brazil. The 10 pieces of real estate, of course, they are not going to be common property because you had such assets before marrying the Brazilian national. However, the income from these 10 properties during the course of the marriage, unless you have a prenuptial agreement saying otherwise, this income is going to be considered common property, okay? So that's what we recommend, like as a minimum, like if you're going to marry a Brazilian national, get a prenuptial agreement to say that income from prior existing assets are not going to be common property, because that's a current interpretation by the Brazilian judiciary, right? And it's surprising to foreign citizens, and I understand, okay? And it is what it is. All right, we have here, Moses has a follow-up. I have called and spoken with your staff before, and they were demanding I pay a consultation fee, but I told them to put the call to you first so that I can get to know if I can be convinced or not. Yes, Moses, I understand some attorneys, they are going to offer a free consultation, but there are two reasons, right? Two technical reasons why we don't offer like this initial call. First reason is because of our insurance, okay? Our insurance says, listen, if you're going to give legal advice, you're going to be given this advice in a consultation, right? Unless, of course, it's a live stream when everybody's together. There is no expectation of advisory because this is an open call. There is no, like privacy, so nobody's going to believe they are in a consultation. However, if we start to answer questions by email or just take phone calls, first thing, we can have an issue with our insurance. The second reason is like in Brazil, it's prohibited, right? Very clearly prohibited free consultations. So if we give you a free consultation, we are basically committing malpractice, right? And these are, the technical questions. Now, there is one more side to it. Like we put so much free content out there. I think when you get to this point, when you want to have a consultation, I think you should be happy to pay for the consultation, right? That's how I see it. And of course, like it's up to you as a prospective client to understand our reasons. Okay, Moses? I hope that makes sense. Almondi, controversial. If my father doesn't want to help me get a passport by going for his citizenship, I was thinking about having a child in Brazil. Is the anchor baby system similar there? Right. Yeah, I mean, a child would give you access to residency right off the bat, right? You have a baby, literally like a couple of months down the road, you could apply for the residency, okay, and then through this residency you could acquire the citizenship. But I just think, I mean, it's too much commitment. I can tell, and I love that, Almond, that you really like Brazil. Uh, I just I just think, I mean, there could be different maybe approaches or different journeys you could have in Brazil, and maybe eventually, I'm not sure, right, if you are married already, but eventually, if you find a partner in Brazil, that could be a track for you to become a resident and a citizen, right? But I mean, to have an anchor baby, I think it's so much commitment, right? Like, I mean, a child is a lifelong commitment, and even though I'm as passionate about Brazil as you, I would not recommend. Okay, but the technical answer, right? I think you were asking for a technical answer, not my opinion on having a child. The technical answer is going to be first you get the residency, right? You have the child, a couple of months down the road, you can apply for residency straight out of the bat, right? It's not like in the US. In the US, the child needs to be, I think older than 21, if I'm not mistaken. But in Brazil, there is no such a need. In Brazil, a couple of months down the road, you can apply for the residency. And then after, you speak some level of Portuguese because that's required for you to apply for the citizenship under this specific track. Then you could secure the citizenship. All right, everyone. I want to say thank you for joining us for this last live stream of the year. Not gonna have a live stream on Sunday as usual. This one we're gonna skip. But on next Wednesday, all right. Let's see, Wednesday the 3rd, right? It's gonna be January the 3rd. We're gonna have a live stream. All of you are gonna be welcome to join us. Think about the topics, and we can have more interesting conversations. I'm gonna wish you a great New Year's Eve, and a happy New Year's Day, and hoping to see you all here next Wednesday. All right. God bless you guys. You take care.